Hello, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name's Emily and I am an illustrator which kind of mainly focuses on collage, although I'm trying to be a bit more mixed media these days. But I'd say collage is what a lot of people know me for. I'll quickly flash up some of my recent collages on screen, so in case you're new here, you kind of get an idea of what I'm about. I've done a lot of prep work for this video. I have made, you can see all that there. I have made an entire timeline of, I'd say 90% of every single collage I've made. I have put on this timeline in the order that I made it from start to finish, and hopefully it will give you an idea of kind of how long it's taken me to improve and how long it takes to kind of get better at stuff. Because when I started collaging, it was all very simple and, you know, it's not the best. So I've been collaging since 2020, November 2020. I found out when I was doing all the research for this was my first ever collage. Before I get into all that, I want to do a little quick bit of promotion. This is June's Patreon print. If you would like to receive this in the post, an A5 print, you have to pledge to the little snips tier on my Patreon page at any point during July, and you'll receive this in the post, as well as instantly gaining access to loads of videos, loads of live streams, blog posts, behind the scenes pictures, sketchbook stuff. Basically every piece of art I ever make gets documented in a lot of detail on the Patreon page. So if that's something you're interested in, that'll be linked in the description. So let's cast our minds back to November 2020. I was in my first year of university. When do you start uni? In September, so 2 months into uni. And there was a project. If you've been here for a while, you might remember this, but I had to do a project where everyone got assigned a different animal, and you had to draw that animal like 100 times in a different way each time. It was basically a way to force you to experiment with your style. I got given an eye, which is like this weird looking lemur, I think. Here it is. It's a black and white collage of a bunch of eye faces. Oh, hold this up. About to see it. I'm sure the picture will look a lot better, but here it is, the first ever collage. You know, you got to start somewhere, and I think it's all right. You know, you can tell it's an animal. And then not long after that, I did another 2 eye collages, this time full body, and I think these turned out pretty well. I think this one is, I'll pop them up on screen, I think this one's my favourite. I think this one actually turned out quite good, considering, you know, all things considered, first ever collage. The textures are quite boring, like I would never, ever do a solid block colour now. Like the body on this eye is just one solid bit of black. I probably wouldn't do that anymore unless like it really needed it, but now every piece of paper has some kind of texture, whether it's really subtle or really obvious. Right, the next collage is, we had to do a project, we had to illustrate a poem in some way, but I think we were forced to do collage for this project. Like it had to be made out of paper, and thank God for this project, because I don't think without this I wouldn't have ever thought to have done collage, and I probably wouldn't be making the art I make today if it wasn't for this project. Because I did it, realised how much I loved it, and kind of kept doing it ever since. So I remember I was doing a bunch of like pages. I'll film this and I'll add it in now. I'm doing a bunch of like practice pages, playing around with colour, and while the shapes are very, very simple and it's all just kind of big block shapes, not getting more complicated than an oval really, I think I just like the idea of not having to commit to anything before I stuck it down, and it was very easy to change things and swap out colours and swap out shapes. And actually I found quite an interesting picture when I was looking through the archives, and I'll pop it up on screen. This was the first ever time that I'd painted a bunch of paper to turn into a collage. I mean, I've barely used the paper. My top tip would be, you know, paint the entire sheet. There's just loads of white around the edges. That's like collage crime number 1. Paint to the edge of your paper. You might as well, you're just wasting it otherwise. The first ever paper painting session. Now I do that at least once a week. It's quite regular now that I paint paper. I paint fresh paper now for nearly every collage. Then the final piece for this project, I'll pop it up on screen. Here it is. I can't remember what it was about. I think it was like spying on someone in a forest, so I was trying to do like the binocular cutout. Not great. I collaged the background there, And then that was the binocular shape there, which I edited together on Photoshop. And then I was trying to draw on top of it with the pencil to add like the trees and the bushes, which maybe wasn't the best decision. And it's very, very simple. Okay, fast forwarding now to February 2021, I was doing a project. Again, all of this is uni stuff. I was doing a project about this person. You had to make a poster about a person without showing the person. I remember wanting it to just be full of all these overlapping wonky shapes, and what's interesting about this collage, which I never do now, and I don't think I've ever done since, I was including bits of paper from a magazine. I only used a few bits from magazines, but there you go. I think you could tell there's been a big improvement jump between the last piece and this, even in just like that short space of time. And you've also got to bear in mind, like between these I'm doing loads and loads of art which isn't collage. I'm painting, I'm drawing, so I've kind of, you know, I'm getting better just in general. Right, fast forwarding now to another project I did in March 2021. I had to make a book about my dad's bike ride. I've gone from not really doing it that much to liking it so much that I'm now deciding to do an entire project where I'm just going to collage. Actually, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. I think before I did this greenhouse collage, and I remember like studying, like staring at the work of Clover Robin. I actually have some of her prints there. She's an amazing collage artist, and when I was starting out I would just stare at all of her work and figure out how she did it. So she was a big help, Clover Robin, when I was starting out, just to see how she would simplify things down into shapes, because when you have this really complicated image, sometimes it can be really overwhelming to think, how can I cut that out into a shape? But just seeing how someone else does it, and then you think, oh, actually they've managed to do it by just cutting out a few shapes and it looks really good. So and then I took what I'd learned from doing that and I took that through into the landscape collage I did about my dad's bike ride, but this time trying to make it more like me and my sort of shapes that I cut out. And I remember really struggling with this back in the day, trying to figure out how to get it to transition from like building to field. But you know what, I think it turned out pretty good and I still quite like this piece. Then I also did a few other collages for this book, but the main standout one as well is this piece here. And this was I struggled with this because it was like bird's eye view and it was a wonky perspective, and I was having to try and figure out this made up perspective in my head. Before I started working on that, making all the finished pages for that book, I made this just from, like, I made this sketchbook myself, sewed it together and everything, and I filled this full of really quick, kind of abstract I suppose you could call it, quick and easy little, I'm trying to find a good example page, little collages, but there's like a massive mix of media in this book, so I'll just do a quick little skim through this. I remember doing this and being really proud of it. Looking at it now I'm like, why? I mean, it's cute and all, but just thinking it looked so cool in how it was really abstract, but you could also tell what it was. Playing around with paper, you can get some really cool things with it. I was very proud of that. All right, moving on to June, still in 2021. Throughout summer, June, July, August, I remember I wasn't really doing that much collaging because I remember thinking that collaging wasn't, and this is gonna, the fact I used to think, this is mad, but I used to think collaging wasn't proper enough, and that sounds so silly now. I used to think, like, I really liked collage, but, you know, I want to be a painter, I want to be able to paint really impressive things. Collage is just something I do for fun. I remember thinking that, so doing loads and loads of painting and drawing in this stage, so I wasn't really doing that much collaging. I remember thinking, like, I want to be the person who paints, not the person who collages, and that's just so silly now to me, because just do what you enjoy, and clearly I enjoyed collaging and I was forcing myself to paint because I'd painted so much beforehand. I'd always been a painter and like coloured pencil as well, and I felt like I was not doing proper enough art when I was cutting out bits of paper, but it couldn't have been further from the truth. Like, just do the art you enjoy making. It doesn't matter what media you're using. It still, you know, takes just the same amount of skill to do a lovely painting and it does to do a lovely collage. That was a silly way of thinking, and only within the past year and a half have I really like accepted that I am a collage artist, although I like to be a little bit more mixed media. But like if someone would ask me what art do I make, I say, oh, I'm a collage artist. But in the past, I might have been like, I'm a collage artist, but I do paint, and I paint as well, and I draw and I paint. And I just happen to do a bit of collage on the side. Like I didn't think it was as proper. And that sounds silly, I don't even know why. I cannot explain that thought process. So I was only doing a few collages throughout summer. I'll pop them up on screen. And this is when I started to notice as well that even though in my head I didn't want to be known as a collage artist, whenever I did a collage, that's what got the most response from people. That's what always got the most likes on Instagram. And I know you shouldn't make art just for likes, like I don't do that, but I started to notice people are really liking when I collage. And I guess maybe that's what helped me like kind of get over this weird thought I had in my head that it wasn't as official of a piece of art as a painting. So I was doing these little collages in summer and I turned them into prints. A lot of them I still sell as prints on my shop. Alright, moving on to October. So I'm back at uni now and I didn't do that much collage either. I was still in the mindset, like I spoke about before. The only bits I could find is a few like practice, like experimentation pages in my sketchbook, and I think these look really cool. Again, just black and white. Actually, come to think, I reckon this is the first ever bird I ever collaged. And I collage a lot of birds these days. I think they are in nearly every collage I make. I like to include a bird. I don't know if you can see it, but probably not, it's too reflective. Got like owl collage up there. I love birds. If you can see it, there's a little paper bird hanging off of a plant over there. I do birds all the time. I have loads of bird stickers. But yeah, here we go. This is the first ever bird. Same goes for December. Not much in the way of collage in that month either. Just a few little sketchbook things. Not much to report. And now moving on to March. And I was doing this project it was quite a long project. It was like 3 weeks long. At this point, I'm in my second year of uni. And it was a children's book project. And I was making mine about the Nigerian folk tale, Why the Sky is Far Away. It's a really fun story. And I started this project just doing loads of sketching, as most projects start. And then I was trying to paint the pages in gouache. I'd recently gotten that's what I was spending all my time on. I remember now. I got gouache for the first time ever, and that's what I was spending all my time on. So collage kind of got pushed to the side, and I was doing these children book like practice pages, and I was trying to paint them, and I just hated the way they looked, and I wasn't really having fun doing it either. They just looked so boring. And then I just remember thinking to myself, I want a collage. Why am I stopping myself from collage? And I'm not having fun. There is this media which I love to do. Why am I stopping myself from doing it? Because I remember being really stressed about this project. I'll pop the finished pieces up on screen. Unfortunately, I have no idea where the originals have gone. And I'm really annoyed about that because they're really nice pieces. And they're quite big as well. I don't know how I can lose 3 really big like A1 pieces of art. So who knows where they've gone. Luckily I have like all the digital files of it. But I love the way these turned out. I had so much fun doing it, and just I've been really expressive with the paper, ripping it, which I didn't really rip it that much in the past. Just having loads of fun with it. And I'll show you some sketchbook stuff I was doing as well around this time. Just like little playful experimentation things. As well, this is the first time I was collaging something entirely from my head. Because obviously these illustrations are made up. I couldn't find a reference picture of an angry person in the sky. It doesn't exist, it's all made up. So this is the first time I was making it all up from my head, because all the other collages I'd done in the past were from reference pictures. I mean, it's not like, it's all just ripped kind of lumps, and clouds are quite easy to collage. And then after I finished that project, it was summer, big summer holidays, and this time round I was doing a lot more collaging compared to the previous summer I had off, and leaning into it a lot more. And this is when I started to try and incorporate collage into my Etsy shop more, because I've had an Etsy shop for ages, but it used to be all painted prints. Like when I first launched my Etsy shop, it wasn't until like maybe 3 shop updates in that I started to include like the first ever collages, because it was all like painted stuff, coloured pencil stuff. But at this point I was thinking, like trying to make the transition to make the shop more mixed media and include more collage things. I remember whenever I do a shop update, I'd like there to be a perfect mix between collages and painted stuff, so there'd be like a good thing to choose from. Although now I'm more of the mindset of I want all of it to be collage because it's good to have like a niche. So I'm trying to phase out all the painted prints that I have and make it all collage. And then in June I made what is one of my best performing videos on YouTube. It was the How I Collage part 1, I suppose, because there's a part 2 now. My How I Collage video where I did this harbour piece. I'll pop it up. And this was, for a while, quite a long time, my favourite piece of art that I'd ever made. I'm looking back at it now, well, I still think it's cute. It's very different. Well, you might not think it's different, but I, looking at it, can see, like, I would, for instance, nowadays I wouldn't do like a big semicircle as just the hill. I probably wouldn't do that these days. I would try to make the shapes a little bit more interesting. Like at the time when I did this, I thought it was really, really complicated. Like the most complicated collage I'd ever made. But looking at it now, I'm like, it's actually quite simple, just because I've made much more complicated stuff now. And then in July is when I entered my butterfly phase, and I suppose the start of my insect phase. I was collaging loads of these little kind of 3D butterflies where they kind of fold them in half and they'd have a bit of 3D-ness to them. I did a bunch of them. I turned them into stickers as well and prints. I made loads, but I think I made 6 and I sold quite a few of them. And then in August, again, just making a few little bits and pieces. But then after that, there was like a huge gap. There was a really big gap, and I didn't make any collages for 4 months. Like the next collage I could find on my camera roll was from January. So there's quite a big gap there where I didn't make any collages, and I was trying to figure out why. And it's because I'd started my third and final year of uni. I kind of neglected collage a bunch. Because like I said, I've only recently, within the past year or so, accepted my fate as a collage artist. So I did a few bits in January. The only things I could find were these 2 pieces here. Well, not much, just tiny little sketchbook things. Because I was focusing more on uni and clearly I wanted to draw and paint. And I think also it was because I knew my final project I wanted to be entirely collaged. And my final project would take many, many months. So I thought I will get all of my drawing and painting out of my system before I commit to months and months of collaging. That I think also was part of it as well. And this final project I'm talking about is my Bug Hotel project. If you've been here for a while, you will probably know all about it because I banged on about it for like a solid 6 months. It was like the only thing I talked about. I'll pop pictures up of it on screen of the finished thing. I made this a DIY Bug Hotel paper craft kit. Made it from scratch. Took a very long amount of time. There's many videos on my YouTube channel documenting it all. I will do a little flick through now of my sketchbook if I can find. There's a few bits of collage knocking about in my sketchbooks, so I'll just flick through them. And I learnt a lot about collage from this project because I was having to do a lot of digital collaging as well, just to make the files work, and like little bits like making all the bits of furniture, that was just so much easier to kind of bring together in Photoshop. So this was the first time I was really ever scanning textures in and piecing them together in Photoshop. While I was doing lots of traditional physical collaging, I'd say about 30% of it was all kind of collaged on Photoshop. So I would scan a bunch of textures in, edit them to be the perfect colour, and then I'd piece them together in Photoshop, or maybe I'd edit together a nice texture which I'd then print off and then collage into in real life and then scan back in and edit on top. So Photoshop was getting a lot more action than it ever had before in this project, so I'd learnt a lot about like how to Photoshop collaging together, and I realised that it's a really good tool, like a really helpful tool to be able to know how to do those kind of things, because there are times when, and you'll see a little bit further down the line, where doing a mix of traditional and digital collaging looks just much better than if I was to try and do it all traditional. There are just things you cannot do traditionally with collage, but again, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked. I'll talk about that in a bit. Oh, actually, no, I'll talk about it now. The cover for this, so I made kind of packaging for it, so I made a front cover. This was the first time that I'd ever collaged things separately on a different sheet of paper and then brought them all together in Photoshop. So I painted the background, collaged the kind of outer frame, I made all the insects on different sheets of paper. I made the hand on a different sheet of paper. I made the scissors on a different sheet of paper. And then I brought it all together in Photoshop and spent hours and hours and hours and hundreds of layers piecing it together. And it looked, I think it's one of my finest pieces of work. So I wouldn't have been able to make this, like I would have had a very difficult time making this all traditionally from scratch. So I worked on that project between February and May, and then I had like a break off after uni finished. I didn't make art for a while. So moving on to July 2023, and so summer, right after uni is finished, and I remember I wanted to do a shop update, so I was focusing on making art specifically to turn into prints. And I also went on holiday, and I took a lot of inspiration from that holiday. There was loads of really pretty places, so I just did a bunch of collages inspired by everything I was seeing whilst I was out and about on my holiday. So I did pop them up, a few what I think of as kind of classics. They're big sellers on my shop, been in my shop for a while. And then from that holiday I made this big seaside A3 collage, and I think this was like a big improvement from the harbour one. Also in July I got really into drawing these cute little mice, and I was doing loads of sketching. Like most of the art I made leading up to July was just sketching in my sketchbook, and I come up with all these really cute mice characters, and I wanted to figure out a way to incorporate them into my collage. So I did this little piece here because I knew I wanted the mice to be painted. I painted them in watercolour with a little bit of colour pencil, and I was trying to figure out a way to incorporate them into a collaged environment, and I came up with this. And while it is quite simple and there's no like overlap between the mice and the collaging, like the mice are on top of white, it's kind of the first ever time that I'd done a bit of more mixed media. I mean, I guess I'd done a little bit of mixed media in the past, if you count painting a background first and then collaging on top. I don't really know if that counts, does it? Because the painted background could just count as another collage piece of paper. I don't know, but this was the first time I tried to incorporate watercolour with my collaging. And then in August I got my first ever commission for a collage. I think I'd done a few commissions in the past, but one was like a realistic oil portrait painting, and I did loads of pet portraits ages ago, like watercolour pet portraits, but this was the first ever commission that I got in with someone requesting that I collaged, and it was a huge commission. It was this big A1, or was it A2? I don't know, but it was the biggest piece of paper I owned. It was a massive collage on that, and I got it framed of this lovely like cherry blossom scene. And really pushed me outside my comfort zone, because I don't know if you'd noticed a theme with all the past collages, but most of them are green. The majority of them are green. I definitely went through quite the green phase. I still enjoy green now, but I think I'm a little bit more diverse with my colour palettes these days. And then between September and October, I couldn't really find that much. I think it's because I was doing loads of sketchbook stuff during this time. I was trying to come up with like a children's book idea, so I was just doing loads of like character sketches. So I wasn't doing much collaging. The only bits I could find, I'll pop up on screen. I actually collaged what was and would be my first ever Patreon monthly print, which was the bird surrounded in all the autumn leaves. I love these autumn leaves so much, I turned them into my live stream. The stuff, when you're doing a live stream, you put the like be right back screen up, or like stream starting soon. That's my autumn leaves are there, and I also use it for my end slate now at the end of videos. I also turned these autumn leaves into a washi tape. I edited them to be a straight line, so I've got a lot of use out of these autumn leaves. I also turned the bird into a sticker, so I've done a lot with this piece of art. And then in November I started working on what was at the time the most complex illustration I'd ever made, and I remember feeling very daunted by it, but it was an idea I'd had in my mind for ages. So remember those mice I showed you a while ago? I wanted to do a more detailed piece with loads of mice in a mouse parade with a fully collaged background, and I had no idea how to approach it because I wanted the mice to be painted, but then I wanted them to be on top of a full colour background. So how do I get these mice to work with collage behind them? So obviously I had to to make everything on separate sheets, so I painted the mice on a sheet. Here it is. I painted all the mice on a separate sheet. I've just remembered now I was gonna like hold stuff up to the screen, completely forgot. And then I tried to collage the background, and I had a right nightmare with this, and I had made a whole video documenting it. It was like one of my first ever Patreon exclusive videos, like a really in-depth video about how I made this piece. So if you're interested in that, it's over on Patreon. But to quickly summarise, I had a lot of issues with it, trying to edit these on top of the collage background. I made a whole background, I hated it. Like, I made a background traditionally, I tried to make that work, I couldn't make it work, and then I basically made the whole background on Photoshop. While I did make a few bits traditionally, I kind of pieced it all together in Photoshop, and it took ages, and the Photoshop file is huge because there were so many layers. But I don't know if you can tell actually, but the flowers that they're holding are all collaged. This is also a print on my shop if you're interested. I do like this piece, but there's art that I've made since which I much prefer. I think you can tell it was my first ever attempt at mixing these two different medias together. And I don't know how well I really like the look of these watercolour mice with the collage background. Maybe if I had another attempt I can make it look better. But moving on to November 2023, this was a big month because this is when I launched my Patreon page. And I started it with kind of promoting it as, you know, there'll be lots of collage stuff on there. Because at this point I've realised people really like the collage stuff that I do. So I could make the Patreon page mainly I just share all the art I make on there, but most of the art I do make is collage, so I'm advertising it as a place to see lots of collage stuff. So at this point now, I'm locked in. I have to make at least one really nice collage every month to turn into the Patreon print, as well as collage all these tiles, I'll get to them in a second, as well as, you know, updating, make lots of like collage bits throughout the month and share process pictures on them, which I was doing anyway at this point. I can also like do anything I want on Patreon. Like if I did a painting, people wouldn't be like, whoa, what's this about? People just like to see my art, which is lovely, but you know, it just so happens that most of my art is collage. But when I started my Patreon, I also started these tiles. So each tile represents a Patreon member, so when someone joins, they can request what they want on their tiles, as long as it's like nature, animal related, plant related. I collaged that on a little tile. The tile are 4.5 centimetre squares, so they're quite small. And although I haven't been able to find much time to make them recently, I have a big list that I need to make, and they just keep getting pushed down the to-do list of, you know, they're not kind of top priority, but I will get around to them. But whenever I do make a batch of tiles, I always really enjoy it because it forces me outside my comfort zone, and it, like, people pick things that I would never think of picking, things I didn't even know existed, animals which I didn't even know existed, I've ended up collaging, and I think I've gotten a lot better because of it. Also because it's small, it forces me to simplify things down into just a few shapes, which I think is like a really good practice for collaging. Just how can I break down this complicated image into just a few shapes. Also in November I made this owl print, one of my favourite collages that I've ever made. I absolutely love it. I love the colour palette, I love the owls, I love the little village, the snow, and this actually marked the beginning of my blue phase. I feel like I'm still in my blue phase. I just really like making art which is blue and pink. I love a blue and pink colour scheme, and you'll see that popping up a lot in my art now. Having said that, here is a piece of art which is mainly green. This is a piece I was making for my portfolio. At this point as well, I was working on my children's illustration portfolio, so I was really focusing on children's art, and I love this piece so much. I'd say it's top 3 pieces of art that I've ever made, maybe top 5. I don't know actually. I absolutely love it. I did this a lot on Photoshop as well, like I was saying before, so I edited the crocodile separately on this different sheet of paper, and then I painted the girl separately on a separate sheet of paper, and then I brought them together in Photoshop, and I scanned in a bunch of textures which I'd painted specifically for this collage, and I pieced it together in Photoshop. I have a really detailed video over on Patreon showing the process of that, but to summarise, I edited it all together using many layers, different opacities, merging, like for instance, the disco ball, that was all done on Photoshop. The background obviously was all Photoshop. The only things that were traditionally made in this piece were the crocodile and the girl. And then all the extra details were added on top in Photoshop. So if I was to try to do this in real life all as one piece, you just wouldn't be able to get like the shininess across of all the sparkly bits of the disco light around them. But being able to do that in Photoshop and just put in a layer and then lower the opacity of the layer so it becomes a bit see-through, that's super easy to do on Photoshop. So there are times where using Photoshop is really helpful, and I think kind of leaning into that with certain pieces of art is just only going to make them better. Also in January, it was a bit of a crocodile heavy month. I made another crocodile sheet with the same characters, again for the portfolio. So I was collaging the crocodile and I was painting the girl, and the girl was painted in acrylic, and I think this looks so much like better and more cohesive compared to the watercolour mice, because before I was trying to like merge watercolour with collage, but here I'm merging painted acrylic with collage, and I think that looks a lot better because the paper I use that I cut everything out of is acrylic. Well, 90% of the paper I use is painted with acrylic paint, so it makes sense that the girl would also be painted in acrylic, and I think the styles just merge a lot better. I also made this nice little desk collage for a Patreon print and a few more tiles, but that was basically it for January. Moving on to February, I didn't actually do that much in February collage wise because I think I was doing loads of sketchbook stuff, working on like a children's book idea. I was doing loads of like sketching out pages. So the only collages I did, a few tiles and then a few landscapes, one of which being the cottage landscape, which I made for a Patreon print but also to turn into a video. I wanted to do a follow-up video to the last How I Collage video because that was really popular, so I thought I could do a follow-up to that, part 2. So I filmed the entire process of me making this if you're interested. It's knocking about on my channel somewhere. And then in March I got my second ever collage commission, and it was of this horse in this landscape with like a sea in the distance. It was an A3 commission, so not as big of a challenge as the last one, which was huge, but still I find it really exciting when someone emails me with like wanting a commission that's collage, because it doesn't happen very often. Well, I mean, it happens a lot, but it's rare that like it goes through to it actually happening. Usually people inquire, but then it never really goes anywhere. But yeah, it's nice when it does, and I can actually like send out a collage that someone's going to really like and frame in the house. It's just a nice feeling. Also in March I made this tea party collage which I turned into a print, and this big like murmuration piece. Here's the blue and pink popping up again, and I really like this piece because it's more mixed media. So the houses on the bottom are collaged, the background is acrylic gouache, the birds are a mixture of watercolour, collage and pencils, and I think that's about it. Oh no, and then all the trees are a mix of watercolour and acrylic gouache. So really mixed media, and this is what I want to start doing a little bit more of. Not all the time, sometimes I want it to just be 100% collage, but there are times, especially when it's more like children's illustration, because I turned this into a book cover. I think this style works really well, it's a little bit more playful. I also made more tiles and April's Patreon print, which was another blue and pink bird in the sky kind of collage. Cherry blossoms. Then in April I went through a little bit of a vegetable phase. I did this really cute little A6 tiny original for every month. I have someone on my Patreon who I send an original piece to, like a little A6 original to, and she requested that it had something to do with seed packets. So I was doing a bunch of digging and I found all these really cute like vintage looking seed packets, so I collaged a P1 and then kind of added a few extra bits on. And I love in this piece the little swirls I added onto the seed pack, and that was done in watercolour, and that was inspired by the murmuration piece that I did because I had those little swirly bits on it. And I actually really like these swirl shapes, and I try to include them in my collages where I can because I just think that's such a fun shape. So I love that seed packet. So that's a little bit more mixed media, and I'm trying to do a bit more shading with watercolour where I can. Then I did a much bigger vegetable collage because I wanted to turn it into a print, which I ended up doing, but I added on this. So this is the original collage, and then I edited it on top of a dirt background, so it's got like a nice dark brown behind it. So that's the actual print that I sell. And then I also turned this into a book cover because I was looking at these two pieces of art and I realised these would make a perfect book cover for like a made up gardening book, a made up how to grow vegetables book. So I pieced it all together in Photoshop, cutting out the individual elements and placing them all together and scanning in different textures to use as a dirt, and then editing the dirt underneath, adding on a little title. Love this piece so much. Also in April I was working on a bit of character design with these bears. Nothing ever came from it. I was doing it hoping it might potentially get me a job, but it never really went anywhere. I'm still glad I did it because I turned the bears into stickers for my shop and I think they're so cute. I also recently made it into a little card as, for my boyfriend mainly, but then I realised actually this is quite nice, so I made it into a downloadable on Patreon as well. I just painted the hearts separately and edited it all together on Photoshop. I know this isn't actually collage, but I think it's worth showing. I'll pop it up here. It's another bear, and I painted this all in acrylic and watercolour and a little bit of acrylic wash, similar to the techniques I used in that murmuration piece, and similar colour palette as well, pink and blue. And the reason I'm mentioning it, even though it isn't actually collage, is because I edited it. I'll show you the original painting, and it was okay, but I knew it could be a lot better. So then I edited it a bunch in Photoshop, and I edited it to try and make it look like it had been collage. Like I made the bear a lot more angular, like it was more like, you know, it could have been a piece of paper stuck down. And what's interesting about this, well, I think it's interesting, is I'm trying to now, like, obviously when I'm doing a collage I paint a bunch of paper beforehand, and I'm very loose when I'm painting the paper, and I splatter and I dry brush and I stamp sponges on to get as many different textures as I can, and I'm trying to incorporate that more into just how I work. So this is a painting I very rarely paint anymore, but I do enjoy it. So when I am painting, I've kind of got my collage paper making hat on, so I'm trying to be a lot more loose with how I paint. So like for instance this bear, like all that dry brushing technique that's what I do with my collage papers, but now I'm just doing that in my painting. The lines are being crossed. And also when I was editing it on Photoshop, I scanned in a bunch of collage textures and I edited them on top of the piece to make it look a little bit more interesting. In April I also made a bunch more tiles, and I made this lovely shell piece, one of my favourite collages. I have it framed above my bed as I made it for one of the Patreon prints, and I absolutely love it. I can't get enough of when a collage has a really dark background with lighter things on top. I think it pops so much. I love a dark background with lots of like intricate details on top. It's my favourite colour palette. I'm moving on to May, which is this month now. May 2024. What have I done this month? I made this birdhouse collage, and I turned the birdhouse in the collage into that right there. I love making little paper 3D things. Obviously I did it as my final project at uni because I quite like making miniature models. I can't find the time for it that much these days, so I feel like that's kind of crossing over with my collage. It's kind of couldn't be more of a perfect media to turn into a paper craft kit. Like you have this paper illustration, like an illustration made from paper, and then you turn that into a paper craft kit. Like it couldn't be more of a perfect combination. I also made this boat collage. I was getting really adventurous with the textures here. Been getting more and more adventurous with my texture making techniques. Like every time I go to make a collage now, I'll zoom in on like my reference image and I'll try and figure out how can I recreate that little snippet of texture there in that picture on my paper, whether that's splattering or like I have just a few different tools like stamps and just also anything I can get to make texture, I'll try and do it now. Whereas in the past I used to just only use the paintbrush, but now I have a few different tools which I'll whip out to try and make textures. Also this month I did another collage commission, my third ever collage commission, if you don't count the Patreon one, because I have been doing them for a few months as well. But if you don't count that one that I do, this is my third big collage commission, A3. This was a really big job because there's a lot of little details on it. I made a whole process video for it. I feel like I keep mentioning Patreon, but it's just because a lot of the stuff I do is for Patreon, so it does just get mentioned a lot. But yeah, I turned this into a Patreon video. The most recent collage I've ever made was this, which I showed right at the start of the video, which is June's Patreon print. And that's it, you're up to date. Every collage I've ever made from start to finish. There's a few missing here and there, I haven't included everything, but I try my best to include what I can. This video is probably really long, and hopefully it's not been super boring. Hopefully there's been lots popping up on screen whilst I've been chatting. One final thing I want to show before I end is every year on Instagram it's kind of a trend to show your favourite 8 pieces of art. You put a picture of yourself in the middle and then you surround it with your favourite pieces of art that you've made this year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try find them, I'm going to dig through and I'm going to find them and I'm going to pop them up on screen from the first ever one I did back before I even thought about collaging to where I am now, and you can see gradually how collage starts to take over. So it starts not a single bit of collage, it's all realistic portraits and a few like illustrations, and then we're getting more illustrations, and then finally collage starts to make an appearance, and then the following year collage kind of makes more of an appearance, and then finally I can't really remember exactly what's on there, but the last one I made I'm pretty sure is 100% collage from what I can remember. Maybe there's one image that isn't, but you can see how collage has kind of taken over. But I'm really happy about that because I feel like I've got a style now, and I just think it's I just think collage is nice. If you couldn't tell by how many times I've said that word in this video, I've grown a lot. And hopefully this has been inspiring if you're thinking about starting it. Like, I've come so far in such a short space of time, but you also have to bear in mind, like, you know, I've also been making loads of art that isn't collage throughout this time. So every piece of art you make contributes to your skill getting better. So while I maybe not have been collaging this entire time, I've been doing loads of drawing, painting and stuff. So all that adds to getting better. Also, before I started collaging, you know, I'd been making art my whole life, so I already had a lot of skills going into it. So, you know, bear that in mind. Anyway, thank you for watching and goodbye.